Hi, Cher.
Hey, Candace, good to be with you today.
Good to be with you too. Wow, it's the day that we are starting our podcast, Processing Trauma Out Loud.
I know, working on this and planning toward this and a dream realized, right?
And something that in the beginning we didn't even know was going to come out of, the couple years that we have already been processing trauma out loud.
I know. Yeah, wonderful.
And then how exciting when we were talking about our first topic that it did not even take really a discussion to say that we wanted to talk about the surprising power of kindness because it is what opened the doorway for us to experience true healing
Yeah,
and healing that we are still on this journey being led by kindness.
right. I know. It is surprising, right? You wouldn't expect something like kindness to be powerful, and yet we both have found it to be very powerful in our lives.
Yes, very true. We just want to jump in with a story about how kindness really, I like the word disrupted your life in a beautiful way. So I want to invite you to just share that story with our listeners today.
Yeah, and it's so fun to be able to talk about going back 2 years to when we started Story Group. And I had worked on my story, my struggles, my childhood trauma for a lot of years already. And I had done therapy and read a lot of books and attended a lot of seminars, and I had worked hard, and yet there were a lot of things that I had not been able to really break free from. Feelings of shame, just continually feeling like there was something wrong with me or bad about me, struggling with the feeling that I didn't measure up. And I could just go on and list. But even though I had worked a lot on my story and on my trauma, I couldn't break free. And so then I started to hear about Story Group. And I decided I'm going to give it a try. And so I signed up on the very last day and with a lot really of fear about what this could be like, I joined this group that has really been so transformational in my life. And here we are 2 years later. We have a community that has walked together through these 2 years, and it's just been just beautiful. And now you and I are working together on this project and excited about allowing our voices of healing and transformation to go out into the world. And so the first time that I shared a story in Story Group, and I had never shared a story, one of my very specific stories of harm as a child with details, what I saw, what I heard, what the colors were, who was there. And this was the format that we were using in our story group. And so I read my story. And as I finished reading, I started to feel a little afraid. Like, what will I see when I look up at the screen? Because this was a virtual group. And I paused a little second or two and I looked at the screen and I expected to see eyes turned away, maybe judgment. Um, and as I looked up and saw eyes with compassion and even some tears, and everybody looking at me. And I was really surprised by that gift of people turning their faces toward me in the context of a story that had held so much shame for me. And immediately our facilitator began to speak to me, and really to me as the little girl in the story. She spoke directly to who I was as that 8-year-old. She spoke words of care that I had never received. I certainly didn't receive it back then. And I had never received. And as she began to speak, I was really taken aback. It was so kind, so caring, so loving. I mean, it was the kind of goodness that I had longed for my whole life, really. And to have it come in the context of a story where I carried a lot of shame, it was surprising, it was powerful, and it changed the course of my life. Really, I stepped onto a new path that day of recognizing, and I'll just say, really like tasting. I got that first taste of kindness and compassion. I wanted more.
Yeah. That's so good. And I had the honor of being in that first group with you.
Yeah.
And I remember that story well. I actually still think about that story sometimes, especially when, I want to be a part of your ongoing journey of needing to feel safe and protected, right?
Mm. The impact of that was huge because, right, a story that was severely harmful and yet in the absence of any care, I didn't feel like it was, in a sense, like I knew it was important and I knew it was a big deal, but I didn't know it was that big of a deal until I heard your words.
Mhm. Yeah. And so being able to like have witnesses,
Yeah.
even though it wasn't real time, we're talking years later,
Mhm.
that little girl actually was able to see more clearly and name more clearly what actually happened in that episode.
Absolutely. Because prior to that, not only did I minimize it, but I felt I was to blame.
Mhm.
And for me to have, like you said, years later, like decades later, many decades later, for me to have the awareness that other people saw it as a huge offense against me, like a horrible offense. Yeah. I mean, it was surprising.
Yeah.
I don't even know what word to say, except just like I remember just sitting there feeling like, oh, wait a minute, are you sure? But yeah, powerful anger in like just such a beautiful, beautiful context.
Yeah. And I'm just so aware that there was a collective care. You had many sets of eyes and ears, and we were all in agreement, right? So it would have been really hard for you to argue with all of us that it wasn't that big of a deal.
Right. Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, it was really a remarkable day. A day, like I said, it set me on a path of toward healing in some ways that I had wanted, but had not been able to figure out how to really get there.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that we can struggle with at the beginning of this journey of like starting to see that, okay, yeah, we have some stories of real harm is the idea of not being sure that we can even share the story, but then do we trust the kindness that's being offered to us, right?
Right.
Because some of our stories involve
Mhm.
a kindness that was presented to us, but there was a price to pay to receive that kindness.
Exactly. And I think also like we didn't understand what trauma was, right? And really through the years, it's as children, when we experience ongoing trauma, we minimize it because that's our real life. We experience elements of it, often. And so we tend to minimize it. And so I think it's important for us to just talk a little bit about what is trauma. There's a whole spectrum. We are going to be talking kind of about one specific type of trauma, but do you want to explain a little bit about what do we mean when we use this word trauma?
Yeah, trauma, like you said, it has different spectrums, or it's described in different ways. I know for me, the idea of things that are too much, too fast, too soon has been reflective a lot of some of my stories. But trauma is an embodied experience. We actually experience it, in our bodies and through our bodies. And so for children that have had developmental trauma, so we have big T traumas, little t traumas, the big T more harsh, more severe in nature, and little t traumas can be, even the idea of, moments that we were very neglected. But when we have those repeated over childhood, that's when we get into what we're going to be talking a lot about is the developmental trauma in the development of who we are created to be. It's continually disrupted by high levels of stress that we are in, of anxiety. We often say dysregulation, where, and we'll get more into this in further episodes, but literally our prefrontal cortex goes offline, where we're able to think clearly, logically, problem solve, and we are actually in our limbic brain. And so in those spaces, we begin to believe messages, right? Like if something's happening over and over again, and a lot of times the messages that come out of trauma is I'm alone, isolated, I'm bad, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And the beauty of story work, story group, finding someone that can help us go back into those stories is that we can actually rewrite the narrative. I like the word override. We can override the messages that trauma, and we'll just call it evil, right? That was intended to keep us hidden, to keep us in shame, to keep us in judgment.
Yeah.
To have self-contempt and other contempt.
Yeah, so important. And I want to just talk a little bit about judgment, because we're talking about kindness today, and we put kindness in the opposite end of the spectrum from judgment. Shame and isolation and all of these aspects that we deal with because of the traumas that we experience really bring us to this place where we stand in judgment of ourselves a lot. And as long as we're in that spot of self-contempt, self-condemnation, even inviting it from others, right? Or allowing it from others, living in a context where we are being pressed down rather than lifted up into the ability to flourish in life. Recognizing judgment and how devastating it is in our lives is really important, because it's truly, and we love this verse, it's the kindness of God that leads us to repentance. So it's the kindness of God that leads us to be able to make the changes that we long for in our lives and in our relationships. But until we know kindness, we will use judgment to try to get ourselves to change. And judgment cannot usher us into healing. It just absolutely cannot. So it's really important for us to recognize, where are we judging? The places where we're judging are really huge indicators of where we really need someone to come with kindness and speak into us, into our lives right there.
Yes. I'm thinking of when I first encountered meeting with a story work coach that I had learned about through listening to a podcast by the name of a man named Adam Young, and he was interviewing um, he was interviewing this story work coach who's my coach today. Her name's Patria.
Mhm.
And I was so drawn just by that conversation and listening to her story and how he engaged her story. At the end of that podcast, they shared her information. And so I went on to her website and ended up booking a consultation with her and started story work with her. And I will never forget in those early meetings with her, as I started to bring some of my stories to her, um, she met me with a few words that, what we like to say is that rewired my brain or began the process of rewiring my brain. And I was having some current day struggles too, right? And she just looked at me and she goes, Kandace, of course. Of course, you would struggle that deeply, and that your journey has been hard and complicated. And, really what she knew because of some of the stories that I had shared with her is I really hadn't ever been in a space of the kind of kindness that leads to life transformation. And so I'm still with her,
Yeah.
2 years later, experiencing the surprising power of kindness.
Mm. I love that. And I love that you found her on a podcast, right? And then you pursued and you knocked down the doors, right? Because you had to have it.
Mm.
And I want to just talk a little bit about how kindness does not mean nice and what the difference is here, because I think it's important that we really have clarity on what do we mean when we say kind, because we're talking about big issues here. We're talking about trauma that we experienced that radically altered our lives in childhood, situations that we could not get away from. We were powerless. And what we needed then was somebody who walked toward us in that moment and helped us, named what was going on, helped us find calmness in our body and helped us and help us know how to move forward or heal from it. We didn't get that. And so what we need today is somebody who will do that. And it's very different than a nice person.
Mhm.
A nice person might say, "How are you? Oh, wow. That must have been really hard. I wish you well."
Mhm.
Good intention, polite, seemingly caring, and yet not able to really go to the hard places and stay with us there, sit with us there, help us process the suffering, the misunderstandings, the misperceptions, the lies. Kindness is courageous and kindness is strong. It's that person who can really see the ugly stuff. Because when we're talking about childhood trauma, we're talking about stuff that is, you know, it's ugly. It's hard and it's hard to talk about, and sometimes it's hard to listen to. It's hard to hear it, but it is the kind person who will go to those dark places with us and be with us there and help us find our way out into safety.
Mhm.
And I just want to say, as we bring things to an end, and I know we want to talk a lot longer about this issue, and we will talk again and again. But I want to say to our listeners, as we just bring this to an end today, that kindness is available. It's real. there are many people that know how to provide kindness and know how to step toward you. There are a lot of people who don't. And so it takes wisdom and it takes discernment as you think about sharing your story of trauma, your stories of trauma with someone. Choose carefully, but don't be afraid to go there and be watching for, looking for that person who can move toward the difficult places and be with you there. That's what we hope for you, so that you encounter kindness in a way that brings healing to your lives as we have.
I agree, Cher. Beautifully said. And I'm excited to take this journey with you. And we will talk more about kindness because I actually have a few more things I want to say.
I know. Sorry about that. But
don't be sorry at all. I mean, everything you said is just, what we've been experiencing for the last 2 years. So, but yeah, kindness is a topic that we will go back to again and again.
Yeah. Kandace, so good to be with you and process this aloud. And I'm so glad you're my friend.
I'm so glad to. Love you, Cher. Good to be with you.